Right. Welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening for our MCTAC Non-for-Profit Board webinar. Today's topic is strengthening board infrastructure, recruitment, onboarding, and assessment. And we feel very fortunate to be joined by our wonderful consultant trainers. We have both Jackie Negri from Negri Management Resources, LLC, and we have Keith Little from Camilli Solutions, LLC. My name is Meg Beyer. I'm the Director of Healthcare Innovation at the McSilver Institute, and I am fortunate enough to be involved in managing the MCTAC project. I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Boris Vilgorin, who you'll hear from towards the end as he manages and facilitates Q&A, and also Nadej Diedrich, who is our superhuman behind every webinar, making sure they're happening, they're announced, we're getting your questions, and we're problem solving as issues come up. So I want to give a huge shout out to our team today that's joining on our webinar. Our presenters are going to introduce themselves in a moment, but I'm going to walk through some logistics for our webinar today. So a couple things about what we like to call housekeeping, the basic important questions. Slides are going to be available after the session today, and the recording will also be available after the session. So it usually takes our system a day, a little bit more, to download the recording in order for us to share it with you all. We will be sending out an email that has links to both the recording and the slides in case you want to revisit any information, share it with colleagues, share it with your fellow board members. We will also be posting this to the MCTAC website. And along with today's recording, we're posting it along with all of the recordings that have already happened in this series, which I'll talk about in a moment. So the other exciting thing about today's webinar is that we've actually set it up as a meeting so that folks can unmute themselves if they would like today. So we are asking you to raise your hand if you have a specific question there's the raise your hand functionality on the toolbar, or you can also chat in your questions. We really want to encourage folks to be engaged, ask questions, offer thoughts on your experience or perspective on what we're discussing today. The more engagement we have, I think the more dynamic these webinars are. And so we also have the opportunity to learn not only from our wonderful trainers, but each other. So just a little plug to please participate today. Ask any questions using the chat box functionality, or you can raise your hand, and we will try and alert our presenters, Jackie and Keith, today when someone's hand is raised in case we can answer that question in live time. I will also say today we do have time set aside at the end to answer questions. So if you have a question, don't sit on it, chat it into us so that we can be sure to address it at the end. I know sometimes when I wait during a webinar to send in a question, I end up forgetting it. So we don't want that to happen. Please feel free to send in your questions as they come up. All right, so the next thing I want to just discuss is that today's webinar is the last in our first chapter of this series. So I mentioned earlier that today's webinar's slides and recording are available on our MCTAC website. We have done previous webinars in this series for non-for-profit board members earlier this spring. So the webinar on DEIB is also posted on our MCTAC website, and the webinar on governance versus management is also posted there. We're sad that this first chapter is ending with Jackie and Keith. However, we're just taking a little summer break for the rest of June, July, and August, because we will be back with Jackie and Keith for September and October to deliver 2 more webinars for non-for-profit board members. So we're taking a little summer break. We will be back sometime before Labor Day to announce what our next topics are and the dates of those webinars. However, since we haven't finalized that schedule, I do want to ask if there are topics that you are inquisitive about or you're struggling with as a board member, please don't hesitate. You can chat us today and say, hey, what have you ever considered this topic? You can email us at mctac.info@nyu.edu. We want to make sure that we are delivering technical assistance that fits with what you need. So if there are particular topics, please let us know. We would definitely be interested in trying to tailor the next 2 webinars to your direct technical assistance training topic needs. Let us know what you need. Okay, so the next slide believe, hold on one second, is our disclaimer. And I'm just going to read this because this is just to kind of drive home that the information contained within this presentation is intended to assist New York State behavioral health providers to explore key responsibilities and the important role that non-for-profit board members occupy. This presentation must be understood as a resource for informational purposes only, and it's not intended to be a substitute for legal advice. Organizations are encouraged to consult federal and state guidelines for information related to non-for-profit boards. And if you are looking for some of that information regarding federal and state guidelines, it is available online. We link to it in some of our presentations in the resource section. There's more information available on the MCTAC website as well. Okay, so with that, I'm going to keep us going. And these are our two wonderful presenters that we have today. If you've joined us before in any of the webinars in this series, you've met Jackie and Keith, but I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves before we get things kicked off, just in case this is anyone's first time on our non-for-profit board webinar series. So with that, Jackie, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jackie Negri, Principal and Consultant at Negri Management Resources. Been working with statewide associations and behavioral health providers, IDD providers, SUD providers for since about 2001. And prior to that, worked in long-term care and healthcare. So have my entire career have been working with boards of directors. We look forward to an interactive session today, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Keith to introduce himself and kick us off. Keith?
Let me take myself off mute. Thanks, Jackie. My name is Keith Little. I am principal and president of Camilli Solutions, a nonprofit consulting firm. Before starting this consultant firm, I served as a CEO and executive director for 3 different nonprofit organizations. I currently sit on 5 board of directors. So in the discussions that we have, it's near and dear to me, and I have both sides of the perspective. The other part is I spent the first part of my career in state government working for the State Office of Mental Health. So I'm glad to be being part of presenting at this seminar. So let me start off with this, and we're going to talk about critical parts of recruitment, onboarding, and assessment. We're going to be talking about the definitions of each, and then we're going to be hopefully giving you examples of effective processes, and that's where we're looking for the engagement. So that's what we're looking to cover. I wanted to start by just jumping back a little bit to the first 2 webinars. Each webinar that we have builds upon the webinars that preceded it. So in our first one, we talked about governance versus management, which was critical in terms of the building blocks to be a good board and a good board member. Then we got into the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the second webinar. This builds on those 2 because if we are able to understand governance versus management, and then also understand how DEIB should be a part of organizations and board functioning, then we can get to the point where we can think about how do we strengthen the infrastructure as it relates to recruitment, onboarding, and assessing board performance. So let me just jump on. So I'm going to start with this, and this is just a little quote. A wise board accumulates rational wisdom, embraces unconventional wisdom, and sharpens system wisdom. And that was from Pearl Zoo. So we're going to start with recruitment, which is a critical part of what all boards think about as they think about getting new members to their board of directors. So I wanted to start with why recruit. Why is it that board of directors recruit? There are a number of different reasons, and your organization may be experiencing one of them or all of them. One part is to expand their expertise. There's some type of expertise in the board that may be missing or lacking, and you're looking for opportunities to expand that expertise so that when you're doing oversight, you have different perspectives that may benefit the governance of the board. Second reason that organizations recruit is to increase the size and scope. Your bylaws may dictate that you can go higher. And so you're looking to increase the size and scope being expertise also, so that you can have more educated board members sitting at the table. The third part is the diversification. You're looking to address issues such as race, gender, ethnicity, and an important one is lived experience. And by lived experience, we're really talking about having individuals who have experienced the systems and the sectors that you're representing. Could be a family member, it could be a former client, a consumer of services. Those have become essential to providing a different perspective for boards to examine issues. The last reason could be increasing development and fundraising capacity. We all know that there are challenges with most boards about the issues of fundraising and development. And the idea that you recruit is you're looking to expand your opportunities for being able to raise funds to support the organization. So those are some of the reasons why organizations recruit. If you understand why you're recruiting, then you're looking at thinking about, well, how do I recruit? I'm an organization. We know why we want to recruit. On the prior slide, you can determine which of those reasons is specific to your organization. Then you're into the how to recruit. And there are a number of recruitment channels that you can do, and we have 3 here. One would be the formal channels. There are a number of board service organizations out there that will assist you and take the lead in finding board members that meet your needs. It's going through a search process. It's doing a fit between the interests of prospective board candidates and what your organization is looking for. We have here on the screen, we've given you examples. And by no means are we promoting any one over another, and we've excluded others. So we don't have any endorsement of any of these. We are just mentioning these as examples. Board lead, board assist, board strong, growth for good, or some, but not all of the board service organizations out there. And the idea is that these organizations do a lot of the work for you, and then you go through the vetting, the interview process, and identify a board member that best meets your needs. Second part is informal. And this might, and a lot of organizations rely upon this very, very heavily. And it's seeking recommendations from current or former board members, from colleagues, and from personal networks. And usually it starts with you making it known that you're looking for board members, and you talk about the mission and vision and the good work that your organization does. And you have informal conversations, and you may get some recommendations. The third one is lived experience, and I was talking about that a little bit before. As we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, it has become very, very important for boards of directors to have at least one, if not more, individuals on the board who understand the services from the receiver end, and they have the lived experience. And whatever sector you're in, I think it's something that's been promoted by government, it's promoted nationally as a best practice model, and it's something you should consider as you look for new board members and find out who's out there. A lot of it can come through the CEO of your organizations or the executive leadership team of the organizations. They can make suitable recommendations to you, but it's definitely an integral part of organizational practices.
So Keith, I just wanted to jump in before we got ahead of ourselves. Did we mean to do a poll?
Oh, yes, we did. I apologize.
No worries, no worries.
Can we do that now?
Sure, yeah,
So what we
absolutely.
wanted to do, and I apologize, we were going to
Got too
do a
excited.
poll because we wanted to get a sense of feedback from the participants in this. And this is the first poll. And it talks about, does your agency have a recruitment process? So I see answers.
All right, I'll give
So-
folks maybe another 5 seconds and then we'll close it, if that makes sense
Mhm.
for you, Keith.
Yep. And as I look at the results so far,
There you
it's
go.
heavily weighted on the informal part of recruitment, which is not a surprise to me. And I see where 23% really, at this point of the participants, don't really have a process in place at this moment. And it's great that you're here so you can learn a little bit about what might be things to be considered in terms of developing a process. So I'm going to take this down. Okay. Let me jump on to key recruitment tips. These are tips that come from organizations that have been successful in terms of recruiting not only new board members, but new board members of value. One part is specific roles for board members. And this is about clearly defining roles and responsibilities for current board members in the recruitment process. It shouldn't necessarily fall upon one person, such as the chairperson. There should be a group, a work group that really looks at and is committed to the recruitment process and really identifies the roles and responsibilities of each one of those. One person might be responsible for outreach. One person might be responsible for doing a tour. Another person might be responsible for doing the communication and the marketing materials. So whatever it is, making sure that specific roles are identified. Two would be recruit for expertise. And this is an important one. A lot of times boards, either informally and sometimes formally, they recruit for the person they know who might be a nice person, but they don't necessarily recruit for expertise. And I think what we've found is that if you identify the expertise that you're looking for, whether it's education or healthcare or a finance person, then you ask yourself, who are the individuals we know who fit into us? That seems to be a better approach and tends to increase the likelihood that you're going to get the board member that you need to meet your needs. The diversity matters. Strongly considering diversity is a critical criterion when selecting board members. Obviously, we spoke about that a lot last month in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And a lot of boards are really looking at this issue, and I'm happy about it. But keep in mind, as you look to expand your board, keeping in mind that diversity mindset. Making sure that there's transparent communication, clearly conveying to candidates why you want them, how they can contribute, how their time will be valued, and how you'll legally protect them because there is liability in terms of being on a board. And then the last part is being able to convey the culture of the organization. And there's usually two cultures of organizations. There's the culture of the board, and there's a culture of the rest of the organization. And being able to let them find that out through board members or through the CEO and other executive leadership staff. Overall recruitment process. We're starting with mission alignment. You want to make sure that two things happen in terms of mission alignment. Number one is you're able to communicate to prospective candidates what the mission is of the organization. And two is get to know if there's an alignment between the mission of the organization and the interests and passion of prospective candidates. You need to get people who really believe in what you're doing and are able to articulate it to you. The areas of expertise, identifying specific areas of expertise. I was mentioning before, whatever it is. 3 examples are finance, legal, marketing, but there are plenty more. Project assignments. It's good in terms of board engagement is to form groups, like I was mentioning before, of board members for specific projects and initiatives. Some related to recruitment, but some related to the ongoing functioning of the board. But the big piece is engagement. Making sure that you have marketing materials. You don't want a prospective candidate to leave conversations without having marketing materials. Obviously, you can communicate to them verbally, but they need to walk away with something either electronically or in hand that talks about the organization and keeps it fresh in their mind. Holding informal meetings, including the CEO in those informal meetings to foster collaborations and partnerships and to give a different perspective to the candidates on the organization. Talking about background checks, making sure that any candidate that you're vetting, you make sure that there's no conflicts of interest. You make sure that you're looking at things such as wealth profiles, and wealth profiles are something that feeds into fundraising if that is your focus. And then the last part is remember an effective board contributes to the organization's success. So those are overall recruitment process recommendations. Final steps in recruitment, recommend candidates to relevant board committees as you recruit them, finding out where their interests are, whether it's governance, finance, development, other board committees. Interview meeting with board chairperson to discuss expectations. That meeting with the board chairperson should probably follow the initial outreach from that work group that got put together. Introduce candidates to existing board members so they can get that perspective, and to executive leadership, the CEO, chief program officer, any member of the C-suite, chief financial officer, so they get a lay of the land from the perspective of the executive leadership. And then there is the nomination and the voting. Officially nominate candidates during a board meeting, and then actually conduct a vote and document that vote in your minutes. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jackie.
Okay, thanks, Keith. We'd like to launch another poll, and this is on onboarding. If you could please launch that. And I'm going to give my colleague a heads up. I did lose power over here, so we just had a quick storm go through if you're in the Albany area. So I've connected via my phone. We'll see, make sure it lasts. So looking on whether or not your organization has a formal or informal onboarding process or not one at all. Okay. Give it a few more seconds. So it looks as though most of the organizations, although not formal recruitment process, do have formal onboarding processes. But then again, about looks like 53%, a little bit more than half, either have an informal onboarding process or no onboarding process at all. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about onboarding. So one of the first things that's a best practice we recommend is to establish a clear timeline for your onboarding activities. Often, as noted in a lot of informal processes, onboarding activities are, it should be laid out up front, and it should be thoughtful. It should be, mindful, and realize that the board member themselves, they have they may have, they have full-time jobs, et cetera, that they have a clear timeline of what they're getting into. All new board members should go through a board orientation, and the orientation should be an official meeting with key members of the board, also meeting with key members of the staff, including the committee chairs. So you want to make sure that this is explained upfront to your board members, and all of them participate in an orientation process. Now, part of the orientation process is to have what's referred to as a board orientation packet, a board welcome packet. And that's important because, as we have said in past webinars, if it's a board CEO partnership, then you really want you as a board member to be able to make informed decisions. And to make informed decisions, you need to have the data, you need to have the materials available. So a board welcome packet, I mean, there's a lot of ways they do it. There's, the traditional 3-ring binder. I think we've all been on boards and received the welcome binder. And then there's online tools or Googles that pull everything together. But basically, what you want your board member to know up front is what organization's marking materials, what's the history of the organization. You, as a board member, you are the face of the organization. You are one who is a cheerleader of the organization. In order to be able to do that, you need to have the appropriate materials. Board is responsible for the strategic plan. Orientation package should have the strategic plan outlining the mission, the vision of the organization, the goals of the organization, the objectives. So a board member who's coming on can sort of catch up to see this is what the priorities are. Also, roles and responsibilities. We see a lot of nonprofits where people are very passionate about the organization. They get on, but once they get on, if there's not a formal orientation, they may not realize what the time commitment is. And that's always very troublesome for ongoing engagement of the board member. So you want to have board roles and responsibilities clearly labeled. So that's right through the nomination process, understand the time commitment. What's expected of you? Are you expected to fundraise? Are you not expected to fundraise? Are you expected to meet monthly or quarterly? Could be a difference. Also, best practice is to see what all the current board members share those bios, collect those bios. Those bios we would recommend are on your website. Again, the board is a connectedness to the organization, and you want to be able to showcase your board as much as you want to showcase your organization. So share the bios. It also allows for that first meeting where I can say, oh, look, Keith and I went to the same college, or we both have this background. In addition, the other area, it'd be the C-suite bios and organizational chart. So is there, is that something you can share? Organizational chart, so you know what your vice presidents are doing, what your departments are, etc. And also any committees and events calendar, that's all very important part of your packet. And the other, we spoke about this in past webinars, is the conflict of interest policy. Every board member, upon joining the board, should be signing a conflict of interest. It doesn't mean that you can't necessarily have a conflict of interest, but it has to be, as we explained in the past, disclosed and filed within the corporation. In order to have a really great functioning board, a board member needs to have real clear expectations of what their roles are. So as an organization, an organization should be supplying their board member with their governing documents, their bylaws, what are your fiduciary duties, and what are your funders' expectations and requirements? So, what does OMH require from the organization? What are their goals? What are they looking for? What does some of the other state funding partners, what are their expectations? If you have major donors, you should have all that information so you have a good understanding of what the organization strategic priorities are, how they're funded, etc. Clarifying the roles and responsibilities. Again, what's the director's roles, and any financial documents. It's really important to share with boards your last audited statement, right? So as a board member, I'm a board member of different organizations. The first thing I do want to see is, can I take a look at the audited financials from the previous years? I need an understanding. It's fiduciary is one of my responsibilities, where they stand. Now, there's a lot of, I mentioned the old 3-ring binder, which we're probably familiar with, but there's also a lot of board management software tools out there. And as Keith said, we're not endorsing any, but there's Board Effect, Boardable. And these are software tools where board members can get everything they need in one click of a button, right? So the organization may upload the financials, they may upload the bylaws, the responsibilities, and they certainly come with a price tag. And if they come with a price tag that doesn't work for the organization, we also recommend, developing, asking staff, can we have a Google area, Google form, so that we can go in and at any time, if you need to obtain a report, obtain the financials, bylaws, you're able to do so. Another best practice we see with onboarding, and that is allowing the opportunity to have a mentor for the new board members. And this really, I think, works for optimum engagement of new board members, because it's difficult to show up, especially when a lot of things are remote these days, and not have that connectedness to another individual on the board. So we always recommend that, pair a new board member with an experienced one for guidance, mentorships, and then it's best if that board member, introduces them before their first board meeting. If they're able to have a connectedness, reach out, a quick Zoom with the individual, just explain to them maybe a little bit about the culture of the board if they have any questions. And also, after their first meeting, because again, it's difficult when you're on a board and geez, I know that Keith is working full time. I don't know if I want to call him during the day and ask him this question about it, but for the mentor to then reach out again to you after the meeting, do you have any questions, or there's any other materials you need? It just allows for that one-on-one connectedness. And what I've seen over the years, that usually establishes some sort of relationship, friendship, professional relation, and also engages the board member. Lastly, showcase the programs, right? You should, if the organization is not already doing this, if you're establishing an onboarding process for your organization, provide tours of the organization's programs. The new board member, again, is the one showcasing the organization. They should have that opportunity to understand, what are the programs? What are some of the ongoing projects? What are the strategic goals? So the time spent with a board member, with the CEO, past having the interview lunch process, just really that engagement of come to the agency, let me walk you around. We want to make sure you're at our first gala. Here are the dates. We want to introduce you as a board member to our funders. All of that really assist in ongoing engagement from the director. So some key steps to ensure successful transition onto the board. Again, board members' roles and responsibilities, very important. Those should include what the role is, how many meetings there are, what they're expected to participate in, if they're expected to fundraise or not fundraise. All of that should be in their roles and responsibilities. Full board engagement. Ask and encourage active participation during meetings. If it's a meeting that is a full report out meeting, it's hard then to get board members engaged with the organization, with the staff, and with one another. So we often encourage, questions on your board meeting agendas, having that opportunity to set aside dialogue on a topic so that they're fully engaged with the organization and the activities of the organization. Now, remember that transitioning is an ongoing process. And often what we see with board onboarding is that, one time, here's your board packet, here's your quick tour, and move on with it, right? And that happens to the best of us who've either been on boards or running boards. So the opportunity to really provide a structured opportunity, know it's ongoing, check in with your board members. Often you'll see boards where board members are maybe not participating. And I've worked with boards where so-and-so hasn't showed up to the last 3 meetings. We're, going to vote that individual off the board. But we encourage that outreach. Lift the person up. Why are they not engaged? Have they been properly onboarded? Have they had opportunity to participate in a committee? Have they been asked to participate in what we call a success opportunity, right? As a new board member, involve them in your gala, involve them in, offer them opportunities to really sort of showcase some early success, because the more I'm engaged and the more I meet individuals, the more that I'm contributing, because that's why I wanted to be nominated to the board to begin with. It was because of my passion, etc. The better engagement for down the road. So with that, I think we're going to take one more poll that they can launch, and I'm going to turn it back over to Keith to talk a little bit about evaluation and board assessment processes.
Thanks, Jackie. So what we've done so far, we've talked about the recruitment process with the idea that each organization has thoroughly thought about why they're recruiting. They've come up with a strategy for recruiting. We then went to the onboarding process, and Jackie spoke about what successful and effective onboarding processes consist of. Now we'll be going into the evaluation and assessment process, which is an area that a lot of times doesn't get highlighted enough. And before we do that, we're going to do the poll. So if we could do the poll right now. And the question we're asking, does your agency conduct an annual or biannual board assessment or evaluation? Give it a few more minutes. Okay. Maybe a few more seconds. So as we look at the data, the findings are not a surprise to us. There are a great many organizations that do a good job of recruiting board members, being able to onboard them appropriately, being able to function in terms of having their regularly scheduled either board of the whole meetings or committee meetings, and really carry out their roles and responsibilities. But in a lot of instances, they forget to assess their performance. They're usually pretty good at assessing the performance of the CEO of the organization or the executive director, but they fail sometimes to assess their own performance, which is equally important to that of the CEO or the executive director. So I'm going to kind of take us through evaluation and assessment process. Get there. So the first question is, why do you assess? And from our perspective, you're analyzing the effectiveness, accountability, and transparency of the board. We're not talking about the CEO, we're talking about the board assessing. We know why the board is there, and we have to assess if they're fulfilling their responsibilities. It verifies whether board members are meeting expectations. There's an assumption that expectations have been set for board members individually, but also for the board collectively. Does your organization have board goals each year? And do they assess themselves based upon those board goals? We know there are goals for board members, attending meetings, get, visiting and getting familiar with programs, exposing their networks. But there should be goals for boards of the whole in terms of meeting those expectations. Establish group and individual goals for the upcoming year is another part. And this is an important one. There should be goals for the entire board in terms of, it could be financial goals, it could be strategic planning goals, it could be a number of different areas of goals. But also establishing individual goals for individual board members. It might be that it could be attendance related. It could be exposing networks. It could be getting more involved and engaged in program oversight and getting to know the programs. Whatever it is, it's an opportunity to engage and to hold board members accountable for not just being a part of a board, but being an integral part of a board with goals being established. There are two types of boards assessment that we find successful boards have. One is an overall, as I mentioned before, board of directors. This is the board of directors doing a self-assessment And obviously, as I mentioned before, it's based upon whether they have established goals. You can't have a self-assessment if you haven't taken the time to establish what you want to accomplish in the next 12 months. And then at the end of that 12 months period, being able to say, well, how did we do? Well, we met this, but we didn't meet this. And what do we want to do for the future? So having that overall assessment of the board of directors, which is a process that should be done jointly. There are a number of different models and formats that are out there, but the bottom line is to have a process where you're doing a self-assessment of what the board did to support the organization. And these should be measurable goals, less about I think and I feel, and more about tangible things that the board said that they were going to accomplish. The second part is the individual assessments of each board members. I'm familiar with an organization where each year the board chair meets individually with each board member to go over how they perform during the year. Could be financial performance, it could be attendance performance, it could be committee participation, it could be project assignments that were assigned. But the idea is that they go through, and it's not in a way which is penal, it's in a way that's collaborative and really motivates and invigorates board members to step up their game if they need to, or validate that they're doing a good job, which is important in terms of recruitment and, more importantly, retention of existing board members. So being able to have both that big picture self-assessment of the entire board and couple that with individual assessments, which means individual goals are established for each board member. It may seem like a lot of work, but I think it will prove of value to organizations as they go through operating and as they look to strengthen their boards. Self-assessment of the board. Based upon already established goals, as I mentioned, it could be a number of different things. It could be mission and vision related and how they support that, fiscal, development, recruiting, onboarding, any of these, relationship with CEO and staff. These are examples, but really establishing goals that you can measure. Second part is providing organized structure for determining the effectiveness of the board. And this is what tool are you going to use to do the assessment? There are a number of tools out there, but being able to have a tool that you identify before the process starts, and then that guides the process along. Have it be a professional approach, uh, organized and professional approach. And then promote constructive discussion. This is not about bashing. This is about being transparent and honest about performance and accountability and being able to have constructive conversations. If you're doing the self-assessment of the board, there should be engagement and participation from all of your board members because all of them have different perspectives. Taking those perspectives and being able to fold them into the overall assessment process and the assessment tool. The individual assessment of members. Emphasize accountability. We're not just here to hang out. We're here for a purpose to support the organization. And if the onboarding process was done properly, then the accountability is already quantified. Promotes transparent relationship between board chairperson and each board member. It establishes that dialogue. Is it more work for the board chair? It absolutely is. But that work will pay off by board members knowing how they're doing, what they're expected to do in the future. As I mentioned before, it demonstrates that a professional approach rather than a haphazard approach. And then it fosters relationship building between individual board members and the board chair, which I think is vital to organizations that are not just a bunch of individuals who come together for meetings, but they're really a team that really functions for the board. Okay, So we've gotten through the assessment process, we've gotten through the onboarding process, and we've gotten through the recruitment process. And we thought that, Jackie, is this me or is this us?
Well, you can take it or pass the baton either way. But basically, what we did is he was going to say, I can finish a sentence. We thought that we'd like an opportunity for interactive dialogue to answer some of your questions.
And we're hoping that you do have questions. So we went through a lot. We wanted to start with if anyone would be willing to share their experiences that they have been positive for recruitment and onboarding of new board members at your agency. There is not one size that fits all. Ultimately, you want a process, and we'd love to hear if you've had some positive results from the process that you used. And then the second part is what challenges have you experienced with recruitment and onboarding of new board members at your agency? We're here to help. We're here not to embarrass, but we're here to help. So to the extent that you have a challenge, there's a likelihood that others have had similar challenges.
Thanks,
So,
Keith. We want to keep it a safe space, and I can start with Michael. I see Michael Dash has his hand raised. If you can unmute.
Okay, hi, how are you? Uh, I'm on the board of directors for SAIL. At one point, I was on the nominating committee, and there was one other person with David, and we used to have interviews with people who were coming onto the board. One particular person stuck out, and we were interviewing her over the phone, and for some reason, I could tell she was just in there to get the experience. She was an executive director of another uh, board. And I really felt that she was just on there to put it on a resume and then leave. Well, she was with us about 3 or 4 years, which I guess you got to be grateful for. And then she did leave. So I was kind of right in my intuition, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because we're grateful that she had time, but I think she was really just doing it to get it on her resume.
Yeah,
so
so
go
go
ahead.
ahead, Keith, take it, and then
No, no, no,
no, go
please,
ahead.
please. Michael,
So,
you
I
asked
mean, I
the
think,
question,
things that
is that a
jump
good
out
thing or
there
a bad
first.
thing?
Yeah, is it good or bad? I mean, like I said, we're grateful she gave us the 3 or 4 years, but I knew she wasn't going to stay permanently, you know. But
So what I was going to add, Michael, is that, every organization also have different terms. So there's different opportunities for folks to either be maybe a 2 year and then another consecutive term for a total of 4 years, 6 years. And then I know there's some organizations that have boards with unlimited terms where we have board members that are there for 10, 15 years. The contributions, as long as a board member is engaged with the organization, whatever works for that individual personally, professionally, it usually may not have to be into the equation. I'm not saying don't, certain gut, you said instinct, we all have different instincts, but if an individual usually goes on to an organization because of passion, but also equally could be because of building their own professional development, right? So as long as the board directors are engaged with the organization and producing with the organization and being a partner, you may get someone who in 3 years has given as much to an organization than another director that could have doubled the time. So I think be more focused maybe on the engagement of the director, what they're contributing, and how that benefits the organization as opposed to terms. Keith?
Yeah, I think the other thing, everything that Jackie said, I 100% agree with. But Michael, the other piece is I think boards need to ask themselves up front, what is their expectation in terms of longevity? Because I think they need to know that going into the recruitment process. If the culture of the board and if the expectation is that someone will be on the board for a decade or longer, um, and that you have term limits and that there's a process in your bylaws where a person can leave the board and come back to the board. I think you have to ask yourself, what does your bylaw say? And you have to ask yourself, what is the expectation that you're looking for? I think the reality is as what I've found is that as you recruit younger board members, you may bring them in. The expectation that they're going to be on the board for a long time may be realistic, may not be realistic, but maybe it's something that you need to discuss when you're going through the recruitment process. So you're understanding where their mindset is and they're understanding where your mindset is. That's part of that fit.
Okay. Thank you, Keith and Jackie. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah.
Other comments, sharing?
Examples of recruitment, onboarding, or assessment that you guys are really proud of. We'd love to hear about that. Onboarding.
John?
Yeah, I can't speak to the positive part at this moment that much, but in terms of challenges, so we have an agency, community residences for people with serious mental health problems. And so we've been able to recruit a physician and a psychologist within the past 18 months. One of the things being, though, I mean, they've been very good about attendance, but it always has to be remote. They can't carve out time. So in terms of getting to know board members, we really have to we haven't experienced that much recently. So other people have more control over their schedule who are board members. So recognizing that we really have to change what we do in terms of engaging people and, being able to get feedback from them and giving feedback to them. So it's valuable, but it's different to have them. There's also an attorney who's been on long-term, and it will depend just if he has to be in court. He's a litigator. Although he's been very good about trying to schedule. I mean, if he has to be in court, he has to be in court. But we'll either prepare beforehand to give feedback to somebody else on the board to share, or try and get in by the end of the meeting to get feedback. So people's professional roles have to be taken into account.
Other comments, questions, concerns?
Yeah, I would just add to that, John, too. I think does your board do assessments, individual assessments and overall board assessment?
We have not, but we'll be beginning.
Yeah. So because when you were talking, I was thinking that's probably a recommendation based on what you shared. How do you assess the board as a whole, individuals, because there is an expectation, and we do have to understand life interferes, profession interferes, but there is a legal, a fiduciary responsibility to the organization. So that's where, as Keith was laying out the assessment piece, it's not there to be punitive at all, but it's there to be more of a partnership to say, is this a good fit for me? And sometimes it's not a good fit. I was just working earlier today, as a matter of fact, with a board where we said it may not be a good fit to be a board member. Maybe it's more that you're active on a committee or something else for the organization, because they couldn't necessarily give the time needed. And there's always room for more voices and diversity at the table. So think about that as you pull your assessment tools together. Mary Lou?
Mary Lou? You're on mute, Mary Lou.
A few years ago, our executive director with legal advice decided that everyone on the board had to give their social security number, and we immediately lost half the board. And now every time we keep trying to tell people that they have to supply that number in order to be a board member, but it does people sometimes say, oh yes, then they think about it and then they back out. So that has been a problem for us. And using Zoom, because we no longer have space, means that we don't build the relationships that we did in the past. And that's another problem.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I've heard that before, Mary Lou, both of those issues and challenges. I'm not sure we have an answer for that.
Yeah, not for the Social Security. I think at one point that was actually required of the state. If I recall, there was a requirement that went out, and that did cause angst amongst a lot. For the Zoom, I do want to say that there are, having sort of facilitators or facilitated sessions with your boards for engagement is one way to try to maybe connect more on the Zoom, and have worked with boards on that, because you need that opportunity. It's not the same as when you're sitting next to an individual and you have the opportunity to just chat, right? So it has to be much more like facilitated, structured. And think about that for the organization, because sometimes a few of those icebreakers or opportunities to, move forward in a facilitated sort of dialogue does allow connectedness over the Zoom. We know it's not the same as in person, but there are a lot of boards that are, national boards, international boards, where it's always been like that. So there are some tricks of the trade.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and also just to jump in here, it also doesn't have to be one or the other, right? You can also say if we were meeting monthly in person, maybe we meet quarterly in person and the other months at Zoom. So I think, kind of thinking about what that potential hybrid model might look like as well. So I just want to be mindful because we have 3 minutes left. And I really appreciate folks jumping in with their thoughts and sharing their experience as well. But I also want to say thank you to Keith and Jackie for the presentation. One of the things I think, as Meg mentioned in the introduction, I just don't want to forget to mention, is that we're also looking to you guys to tell us what other topics or areas, or if something we talked about today that you want a deeper dive or more discussion. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Either you can chat it in today or email us any way you would like to communicate with us. We'd love to hear from you folks, because the goal for us at MIGTAC is to really create opportunities and resources for you. Keith and Jackie has been great in kind of coming up with ideas. We have other ideas as we move forward, and planning for our fall event. So really, folks should look out for other announcements. And also, we encourage you to invite your colleagues to join these presentations as well from your board, or if you have colleagues that sit on other boards of OMH, OASIS organizations, we really would love for the word to spread and others to join us as well. So just wanted to kind of remind folks that we're really here for you and want to make sure that what we're hitting on is helpful, and other topics that we should be touching on. So I know Jackie and Keith, in like literally a minute we have left. Any other things you want to mention before we close off today's session?
Just one thing real quickly. What we spoke about today is the elements of building a board of directors. What we didn't talk about is, which is the reading in between the lines, is how do you build team? Because a lot of times you have board of directors that come together for meetings, because whether it's virtual or whether it's in person, they get together, they're in the meeting, and then they go their separate ways, and there's no team building. So as you think about this, think about everything that we spoke about, but also think about how you build team.
Good point.
Well said, Keith. And, we're here to assist. So if you have any questions, feel free to email us. Our emails are on the screen. Again, there's not one agency is like the next agency. So you have to work with everything that we're presenting within the culture of your organization and your board. And that's the beauty about nonprofits, is that there is different cultures, diversity that we can bring to the table. So there's not a one tool fits all, but I'm hopeful that today, looking at the polls, that some of you do think about bringing back to your agency maybe more of a formal recruitment process, more of a formal onboarding process with timelines, and think about starting with a board assessment tool, moving into that individual directors tools. Again, one of our slides said it's a transition, it's not a one and done. So as you continue to build your boards, we're here to continue to support you. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And again, Keith and Jackie, thank you for another wonderful presentation and discussion. Take care, everybody. Thank you.